Hi, I'm Ian.
And I'm Jason.
And this is Ghosts and Bears, the only podcast where we bring you the actual ghost stories
With the actual history.
in the actual place. On this episode of Ghosts and Bears, it's the Ghosts of Christmas Past as we once again tell Victorian ghost stories for our season closer. We also have a special Christmas giveaway and more clues as to what's going on behind the scenes because this is a video episode with our friends shooting Chris, Alex, and Josh. So come with us on this episode of Ghosts and Bears. All right, here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
It's Christmas time. We are dressed like fools.
We look fine.
Yeah, this is what we normally wear around the house.
Typical wear.
Where's my nightcap? Yeah.
Here it is. Well, one of them.
We have our Christmas decor.
That's right.
Where you went a little crazy in Hobby Lobby.
Oh, well, yeah. I enjoyed Hobby Lobby. You got me into Hobby Lobby, and there we were.
Yeah, and we apologize to our listeners for Hobby Lobby and its controversial stance on many things, but they had 60% off Christmas decorations.
Yeah, so it was good. 60% off everything. So you kind of walk through the store, you fill up your cart, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you come back to your cart and dump whatever you don't want, and then you do it again and rinse and repeat, and then you do it a third time, and you're pretty sure that the cart's filled with what you want.
And there is a lot.
Yeah. Oh god.
It's like if you've ever been into a Michael's.
It's overwhelming.
Imagine Michael's to the power of 10.
Yeah.
It's to the roof with Christmas crap.
Reasonable. Yeah. Yeah. It's reasonable quality and it's quite nice. The atmosphere is fun.
I got these lovely ceramic trees, which
yeah, that's true.
bring me back to my childhood.
I think this one was like $5 and that one was 12 or something.
Yeah, no, it's a good deal.
Yeah.
So we did all this though. Oh, and I got the candle holder and the lantern.
Yeah.
Those are all nods to what we're doing.
This.
Well, those don't really count. Those are just
these lights.
Yeah. Because we're doing what we've normally done. I think we did it last year, right?
Yeah, for the Halloween episode. So
we did the video. And for Christmas last year, we also did the Victorian Christmas stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because Christmas is actually not about Santa and Coca-Cola ads when way back in the 1800s. It was about telling ghost stories. That was really the only time the family came together. You stayed up past the sun going down. You all gathered together in one room, mostly because of economics, because you could only heat one room.
That's right.
And you would then have this amazing time of telling the scariest stories you could think of. Halloween wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It was really, Christmas time was the thing.
That's fair.
So some of these stories tonight have vaguely Christmassy overtones, but they're not going to be what we think of as Christmas, which is that Coca-Cola advertising Santa in a red suit and reindeer on the roof and all that crap. That came a whole lot later.
That's very true.
That's not actually part of actual Christmas if you're from the 1800s. So we're sticking more to, kind of old school stuff. I have a great...
Speaking of which...
Yeah, please.
I was in the Tube at Christmas today at Market
You
Square,
were?
so that was cool.
That was old school.
But it was interesting to hear my buddy Paul say that Christmas trees, speaking of Christmas and Christmas trees, they're a German thing. They're a German tradition.
100%.
Tannenbaum, which is...
They would tie candles to the trees. I mean, the Germans are crazy.
Yeah.
They'd be sticking... Let's cut down a tree, first of all.
Yeah, and then...
Bring it into the house.
Yeah,
and then let's
candles.
tie flammable objects to its branches and see what happens on this highly pine-filled...
Yeah, so
Yeah,
to
what
our
could go wrong?
listeners, there was the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
So yeah, there's a whole bunch of mishmash that's come together to
Yes.
make what we think of as Christmas. Wouldn't have been at all familiar to our ancestors a couple hundred years ago. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So I found this great article from a writer. Her name's Kira Cochran, and she was talking about why the Victorians were so good at Victorian Christmas and the ghost stories. So I thought I'd read that. Curl up by the fire and I'll tell you a ghost story. Don't be alarmed by the creak of the floorboards, the murmurs in the basement, or the shrill ululations of a distant dog. Try not to be perturbed by the flickering candle. Hold on. There we go. Flickering candle. The fleeting shadows, the horned, hairy hand that appears at your elbow. Something moved. There's a face in the brickwork. A murderer long ago was buried in the cellar. Stay calm, breathe deeply. The ghosts of Christmas past are gathering. It was the Victorian era, of course, when ghosts proliferated most obviously in fiction as well as on stage, in photographs and in drawing room seances. Before the start of the Victoria's reign in 1837, the health of the genre was thought to be failing. But by 1887, when Marie Louise Molesworth wrote The Story of the Rippling Train, her character, Mrs. Snowdon, was bemoaning ghosts' prevalence. One hears nothing else nowadays, she said. And in the pages that followed, she would hear yet another about the phantom of a beautiful woman who had appeared after being terribly burnt in a fire. I think we did that one last year, didn't we? What had raised all these apparitions from the dead? The most straightforward explanation is the rise of the periodical press, says Ruth Robbins, professor of English Lit. Ghost stories had traditionally been an oral format, but publishers suddenly needed a mass of content, and ghost stories fitted the bill. Short, cheap, generic, repetitive, able to be cut quite easily to length. Everyone to spot a commercial opportunity, she says, Charles Dickens produced his own highly successful ghost story, which is the one most people know, The Christmas Carol.
Okay, yes.
In serial form, just before Christmas in 1843. This was the same year the first commercially produced Christmas card was sent, and Dickens' story both reflected and influenced a growing trend for marking Christmas with secular celebration. Dr. Andrew Smith said people like Dickens wanted to revive some notion of community invested within that idea of Christmas. What's interesting about his version of Christmas is it's not particularly Christian, which of course it would have been, you were supposed to be in Victorian times. It's about the family, about helping the poor, a moment where you might pause and reflect on your life. It's about Ebenezer Scrooge realizing through the counsel of ghosts that he must embrace his family, look after his good-natured clerk, and become the embodiment of generosity. The popularity of ghost stories was strongly related to economic changes. The Industrial Revolution that led people to migrate from rural villages into towns and cities and created a new middle class. They moved into houses that often had servants, and many taken on around October or November when the nights were drawing in early, and new staff found themselves in a completely foreign house, seeing things everywhere, jumping at every creak. Robbins says servants were expected to be seen and not heard, actually probably not even seen, to be honest. If you go to a stately home like Harewood House, you see the concealed doorways and servants' corridors. You would actually have people popping in and out without really knowing they were there, which could be quite a freaky experience. You've got these ghostly figures who actually inhabit the house. Didn't help that lighting was often provided by gas lamps, which have also been implicated in the rise of the ghost story. The carbon monoxide they emitted could produce hallucinations.
Makes sense.
So there you are in your stately manner, high as a kite.
Yeah, maybe.
And only one step away from death. And there was a preponderance of people encountering ghosts in their daily life come the middle of the century. In 1848, the young Fox sisters of New York heard a series of tappings, a spirit apparently communicating with them through code, and their story spread quickly. The vogue for spiritualism was underway. Spiritualists believed spirits residing in the afterlife were potentially able to communicate with the living, and they set up seances to enable this. So really, this whole thing with ghost stories was almost just sort of the start of it. Because then it turned into spiritualism, and then it just exploded, not just in England, but all throughout America, all throughout the U.S. So it's pretty wild stuff. We've got a few stories for you tonight. We're going to start with a story, and then we're going to have a little musical interlude, and then you'll do a story, and then I'll do a story, and we'll go that way. And then we've got an exciting contest to talk about at the end.
Oh, yes.
We're giving
That's
something away
exciting.
for Christmas because we're generous. And hopefully you will enjoy that. And up to that, I guess we will see you in the story chamber. Haunted Ash Church by Anonymous. It was a lonesome little country church. quite deserted and rapidly falling into decay. The nearest house was that of old Joe Salter, the blacksmith, and that was fully half a mile away. It could not be said that the little fabric possessed anything of architectural beauty or intent. A plain, oblong building with a square, thick-set, squat tower, it had no chancel. It was hard upon 50 years since regular services had been discontinued at Ashchurch, owing to the building and endowment of a handsome new church, near the center of population and better adapted to the requirements of the parish. For about the first half of these 50 years, the cracked old bell of Ashchurch still rang occasionally for the funerals of old residents of the parish, for the churchyard was not declared closed when the Sunday services ceased. But the time came when the authorities decided that henceforward all burials must be in the new cemetery. Up to that time, the aged church had been kept in some sort of repair, and had at any rate been watertight. But from that time, the efforts made to keep it up had been spasmodic and inadequate, and year by year it became more and more dilapidated. The ivy now grew in unchecked luxuriance, not only over the walls but over the roof. As for the tower, it became a perfect bush of creepers, under which the form of the masonry was concealed, like that of an Eskimo. Oh no. I just read that. Like that of an Eskimo in his furs. How do you feel about that as a First Nations person?
That's fine.
You're good with it?
Yeah,
all right,
it's
we'll
fine.
stay with it. I'm going to just leave the word as it is in its historical content.
It's an interesting spelling, though.
I've never yet. For anybody who's interested, Esquimaux.
Eskimo.
Esquimaux.
I can see why you would put Esquimalt.
Right?
Because it looks like that. Esquimalt
Anyway,
for our viewers is
a local
next door to us.
Anyway, back to the story.
Mm-hmm.
The once trim laurel hedge put forth greedy arms and embraced within its unwieldy and irregular width many of the moss-grown gravestones. Grass grew coarse and rank on the churchyard paths. Here and there a headstone or a mound of green turf showed signs of care and loving tendance, but as a rule the graves, like the church itself, looked neglected and desolate, and some were hidden by foxglove and nettles. A stranger accidentally detained in the parish by the effects of a fall from his horse, being convalescent, had strolled aimlessly down the narrow winding lane which led to the church, and, coming suddenly upon it, had been struck by its forlorn appearance. Leaning over the rusty-hinged churchyard gate, he descried a woman and a sturdy girl hurriedly weeding one of the smallest of the green mounds of its rank growth of dock leaves. His attention could not but be arrested by the headlong haste which characterized their performance of a task over which love usually lingers long. As he was desirous of learning something of the history of the church and of the cause of its present state of decay, he with some difficulty opened the crazy old gate and went towards them. But though he succeeded, by dint of questioning, in eliciting most of the facts of which the reader is already in possession, he found the woman far from communicative, and evidently anxious to be gone. Once only did her natural love of gossip prompt her to impart unsolicited information. "Folks hereabout do say," she began, "as how she had a hand," but here, as though frightened at her own impulse, she broke off abruptly, and turning short round, ambled off at the top of her speed, closely followed by the girl, without shutting the gate behind her. The stranger heard the patter of their feet hurrying down the lane, and smiled, the superior smile of an educated man. "Some superstitious fancy," he said to himself. Choosing a flat tombstone, he lay down at full length thereon, and gave himself up to the full enjoyment of the lovely summer's evening. The pure physical pleasure of it, to one who had so lately been an invalid, was most grateful and soothing. The intense quiet of the place, amid the sound sleepers beneath the sod, its touching air of desertion, and its uncared-for aspect, the history of the abandonment of the church, all appealed strongly to his imagination, and he was soon lost in a dreamland of musings. At length, warned by a cold gust of evening air that he was hardly strong enough yet to risk being out in the dew, he rose to go. He was amazed to find that he must have been there over 2 hours. It was getting dusk, and his watch told him it was 8:30. He turned to take one last look at the lorn church, and as he did so, caught a glimpse of the white drapery of a woman's skirts in the act of disappearing around the northwest corner of the tower. He had a strong distaste for anything like intrusion on the privacy of one who was possibly visiting the grave of a relation, and he accordingly left the churchyard without again turning his head. But he was conscious that it cost him a strong effort to do so, owing to a most extraordinary craving which he could not for the life of him explain, to look round the corner of the tower. On his emerging from the lane, he saw the cheerful glow of the blacksmith's forge some way ahead. Salter had done some work for him, and it might, he thought, be as well to ask the loan of a topcoat for the rest of his way home. In height and build they were much alike, so he turned in at the half door of the forge. "My sakes," said the blacksmith heartily. "Why, it's Master Cortram. Glad to see you, sir, out and about, though 'tis night too sharp an evening, and you not quite set up, as you may say." "True, Salter, and so I've come to ask you to lend me an overcoat." "Right you are, sir, and welcome too, but set you down and have a warm first." And the blacksmith, mindful of the duties of hospitality, drew his shirt sleeves down over his mighty arms and proceeded to light a pipe by way of company to Mr. Cortram's cigar. "'Twas a quaint spot this close by you," said the latter, as he struck a light and passed it over to Salter. "Meaning?" queried the smith as he held the match over the bowl. "Ashchurch." Salter let the match drop. "What? Have you been there? At this hour of night?" "Hour of night indeed? Why, it's barely dusk, and what is more, some lady or other is probably there still." This time, the blacksmith dropped his pipe, and it was smashed against the anvil in the fall. The man was as pale as death. "What ails you, Salter, my man? Here, have a cigar." I want to be that rich dude and be like, "Have a cigar." Salter took no notice of the proffered cigar case. With an effort, he drew himself up to his full height, and in the deep shadows and strong lights of the forge, he looked like a prophet of the olden time as he said most earnestly and solemnly, "Mr. Cortram, sir, go ye home. Do ye now, and pray tonight when ye says your prayers, as in course ye do, that no harm may come this night to you or any of your family." Mr. Cortram respected the man's emotion, though quite at a loss to guess its cause, and without bothering him further about the overcoat, walked briskly home. Next day he sallied forth as usual in the evening for a stroll, but had not gone far when he met a mounted messenger from the telegraph office of the neighboring town, who recognized him and handed him a telegram. It announced the sudden death of an uncle the previous evening at 8:30. The recollection came to him like a sudden gust of icy wind, chilling his heart, that at that very time he'd seen the mysterious white dress floating around the corner of Ashchurch Tower. Why his instinct connected the two things together, he could not divine. He was by no means a fanciful man, but was generally credited with a clear head and a strong common sense. Having the responsibility for the arrangements of his uncle's funeral, he left the place that evening. Some months went on, but notwithstanding a great pressure of business which came upon him in consequence of his uncle's death, the mystery of Ashchurch continually recurred to him. The strange behavior of the peasant woman in the churchyard, the unexplained emotion of the blacksmith, his own strong and unaccountable yearning, that memorable evening, to look behind the tower, the odd coincidence of his uncle's death, with his glimpse of the white dress, passed and repassed before his mind's eye over and over again. One evening he'd sat down to look over old papers and letters with a view to destroying what was worthless. His uncle's correspondence had been extensive, and the task was a fatiguing one. He was on the point of giving it up for the night, when out of one of the letters there dropped a square piece of yellow-looking paper, which fluttered down upon the carpet. He listlessly picked it up. The inscription on it was so curiously in accord with the subject uppermost in his thoughts that he was roused into strong interest. It said thus: "Her vesture dimly seen afar, to him who sees an evil star. Herself who sees, he shall be blessed, and give her weary spirit rest." His mind was so possessed with the conviction that the two first lines of the doggerel described what he had himself recently experienced, that he felt no surprise at the time on reading at the head of the letter, in which the paper had been enclosed, the word Ashchurch over the date. The letter turned out to be one written to his uncle, by a former resident in the parish of Ashchurch, who had been many years dead. It gave a long account of the Ashchurch ghost, quoting several cases of its white robes having been seen in the moment of their disappearance round a corner of the church. Always the same corner, the northwest, and in each case some disaster was found to have befallen the person witnessing the spectral appearance at the very moment of the ghostly dress having been seen. Strangely enough, Cortram had never heard his uncle mention the subject, and up to the date of his accident some months before, he'd never even heard the name of Ashchurch. On turning to his uncle's diary, he found within a week of the date of the letter the following entry. Went to Ashchurch, ghost hunting, to prove to poor Connor what fudge it all is. The next entry was a fortnight later. Not so sure about fudge. I certainly saw something, but it was probably a wreath of mist. And 3 days further on, George died this very night and the very hour in which I saw that something. George was a cousin. It appeared from Mr. Connor's letter that the rhymes on the bit of paper were a copy from an old parchment found in a chest in Ashchurch Tower. Cortram carefully preserved both the letter and the copy of verses. His uncle had left him all his property, and he therefore wound up his own business and settled down as best he could to the life of a country gentleman. As best you can. But he felt that the associations of Ashchurch had taken so powerful a hold of him that he could not shake it off. He had a feeling that in some inexplicable way, against which his will seemed powerless to contend, he was being drawn to visit the place again. He long battled with the feeling of being morbid and childish, but finding that he was growing hippish and sleepless, he determined to try whether the actual sight of the place would not work a cure. So, about a 12-month after his first visit to it, he found himself once more in the Ashchurch Lane on an evening late in June. He had been some days in the parish and had employed the interval in getting as much information as he could out of the oldest inhabitants, but this amounted to little beyond what he'd already learned from Mr. Connor's letter to his uncle. Of late years, even the lane leading to the church had been religiously shunned by the parishioners, and a ghost, it is plain, cannot be seen without somebody to see it. One additional piece of evidence, however, he had got at quite accidentally. It happened that one day he'd called upon the village doctor, whose acquaintance in his professional capacity he had made during the last day in Ashchurch. The doctor was a squarely built, weather-beaten man, as prosaic and matter-of-fact as a man could be. The conversation turned upon Mr. Connor. I knew him well, observed Dr. Cosson, and attended him for some years before his death. He died at 4:05 on December 10th, 12.5 years ago. Do you always remember so accurately the time of your patient's departure, Dr. Cosson? Why, no, but there were peculiar circumstances. Do tell me what they were, if you will promise not to laugh at me. It fell out, that afternoon, that I'd been paying some professional visits and was returning home by Ashchurch Lane on foot. I remembered that in a corner of the churchyard there grew a herb which I had often found useful, so I jumped over the gate to gather some. I was busy doing so when I remembered I had another engagement later on and must make haste. Glancing at my watch, I found it was 4:05, and just then, in the dim light, I saw the white train of a woman's dress disappearing around the corner of the church. It was so real to my mind that I felt sure I should have seen the whole figure if I'd only raised my head earlier. I had heard of the same sort of thing having been noticed before, and I'm not ashamed to say that I got back into the lane and home as fast as I ever could. For when I reached my own door, I found that a messenger had been sent by Mrs. Connor in my absence to say I was urgently wanted, as Mr. Connor had been suddenly taken worse. I went immediately, but I was too late. He died at 4:05. And have you any theory about it, Doctor? Any explanation? The doctor shrugged his shoulders and the conversation changed. Thinking of this, among other things, Cortram slowly proceeded towards the church. He felt a strong presentiment of some coming event approaching him with the slow steps of fate. The gate had grown so rusty that it was some time before he could force it open. A hasty glance round the churchyard told him that neglect and decay were rapidly doing their work. The place was a greater picture of desolation than ever. He stationed himself where he could best watch the northwest corner of the building, leaning his arms on a headstone, and concentrating his whole attention on the spot where the apparition had before shown itself. For a long time he so remained, till his eyes began to ache with the fixity of their gaze. At length there appeared on the surface of the ground, not more than 2 yards from the corner of the tower, a sort of wreath of vapor, it seemed, gradually gathering consistency and moving very slowly along the ground towards the tower, till at length it took the semblance of trailing garments. It was in the act of disappearing as it had done before, when with a peculiar wavy motion of the drapery it suddenly seemed to halt, leaving still a portion distinctly visible, as though the mysterious wearer of the dress was standing just behind the ivy-covered corner. Cortram felt his hair stand on end, and a cold dew seemed to break out on his forehead. Nevertheless, he felt impelled to advance, as though some hidden agency within him, more powerful than his own will, were using his limbs for its own purpose. And still, as he got more abreast of the tower, as well as nearer to it, more and more of the ghostly drapery became disclosed, till at length the tall figure of a woman, with a hood drawn over her face, stood close beside him. Cortram, as though in a dream, heard a voice he did not recognize as his own voice, yet a voice using his tongue and his lips say in a hoarse whisper, "In heaven's name, what troubles you?" Slowly the hood fell from the figure's face, a face unutterably sad and inexpressibly sweet, and its shadowy hand pointed to the wall of the tower. Then the lines of the shape grew indistinct and it melted away. Cortram staggered forward and marked the spot towards which the hand had pointed by tearing down a twig of ivy. He then, with a shiver, hurried homewards, but a deadly faintness came over him, and ere he had gone many yards he fell down in a swoon. When he came to himself, the moon was high in heaven, and it was close upon midnight. As he crept home to his lodgings, stiff and cold, he determined to come next day alone, and thoroughly examine the spot he had marked, having the profoundest conviction that he was on the verge of some discovery. Accordingly, after a good night's rest, feeling no ill effects from his adventure of the previous evening, he went once more to the little graveyard. He found the branch of ivy hanging down with drooping leaves, and after some groping he discovered a chink in the wall, into which he could thrust his hand, and out of which he drew a small wooden box, with clamps of iron at the corners and tightly shut. With the help of a chisel which he brought with him, he burst it open. Within there lay a paper, folded and sealed. He opened it and read it in modern English. It ran as follows: I, George Cord, killed my wife, Grace Mabel Cord, taking her unawares with a knife in the back on the 3rd of August, 1742, when she was going around the corner of Ashchurch Tower to visit our baby's grave, which was my pretext for getting her into a lonesome place, being firmly set to take her life. I buried her in a hole dug under the hornbeam on the north side. God help me, I have spilt the blood of the purest and sweetest wife ever man had, on foul and most unworthy suspicion, which drove me mad. I have this day found proof of her utter innocence, and I leave this confession where the next comer will not fail to find it. In 5 minutes I shall swing dead from a limb of the hornbeam, and may God have mercy on my soul. Cortram folded the paper carefully up, and having put it in his pocket, replacing the box in the chink of the wall, went straight to the parish doctor's house. He caught him as he was starting off on his rounds. "One word, doctor. Have you heard of one George Cord who committed suicide in Ashchurch some 100 years ago?" "Yes. They say a rich young squire of that name hanged himself on a tree in the churchyard." "Was any reason alleged?" "The tale goes that his heart was broken by an unfaithful wife who left him, and was never seen or heard of more." "It was a lie, and I can prove it." The doctor stared. "Come to my room after you've been your rounds, and I will tell you all about it." The doctor and Cortram took such steps as were possible to clear the memory of George Cord's wife of the cloud which had so long rested upon it. Her husband must have meant to place the little box in as conspicuous a position as possible, but it had dropped out of the trembling fingers further into the chink in the wall than he had intended, and the ivy had grown over it. The poor bones under the hornbeam were given a Christian burial in the husband's grave, and the dust of the murderer and the murdered commingle in peaceful rest. It was the last funeral in the old churchyard. Never more were the ghostly trailing garments seen, sweeping around the corner of Ashchurch Tower.
Wow.
So what did you think?
Wow, it was really good.
It was a good story. Again, not overly Christmassy, but it was a perfect kind of ghost story that they would have told in a Victorian household. It had the beautiful wife.
Yeah.
She was done wrong. It had ghostly implications. It had everything going on.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And of course, the rich guy. All these stories seem to have some rich guy.
Oh, it makes sense. It's a true fact that murder is less expensive than divorce. So
wait, what are you planning? I'll come home one day and you'll be like, "Can you meet me in the backyard, please, close to that
just
cliff?"
Go around the corner.
Yeah, just go around the corner. So, at least I'll know it's coming.
Oh yeah, chasing Moby.
Chasing Moby. No, I liked the story. I thought it was a great story. I thought they
You read it well.
Thank you. Well, it hung together really well.
Other than Eskimo, but that's a really bizarre spelling.
You know what? The funny thing is, I pre-read all of these stories to pick out the ones we wanted to do. I remember reading that word, going, "What? Oh." And thinking, well, that's not appropriate.
No, it's
but then thinking, well,
it's of its time.
It's of its time.
That's
it's
fine.
of its time.
You know.
So, but the spelling really threw me too.
Yeah. MAUX.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But no, and you know what I loved about it was the way the writer put it together. I could see that church.
Yeah.
It wasn't hard to feel like you were in
That's right.
that churchyard.
You could feel the setting and you could feel the melancholy and the heavy set and It was engaging.
Good. Yay. All right. We're going to take a little break and Jason's coming back with our next story right after this.
I will flap my gums on the next one. And welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that piece. So I will be reading the next story, and it's called The Nameless Village by J.E. Thomas. So it's a mystery of the Mendip Hills. Dead and forsaken, buried neath a ban, nameless and lost to memory of man. I had been walking nearly all day over the Mendip Hills. Many a village and hamlet had I passed in my wanderings, but none so quaint as the one, half hidden in a rosy haze, which I was approaching. It was nestled deep down, in a hollow, and the setting sun tinged with the little thatched roofs of the cottages, and the autumnal tinted foliage with touches of gold, crimson, and purple. A faint scent of sweetbriar seemed to pervade this tiny village. It formed altogether such a pretty old-world picture. Soft moss grew luxuriantly over the little porches, and the last roses of summer bloomed in their tender beauty from the cottage walls and covered like a fairy curtain the diamond-paned window. Giant hollyhocks and prickly holly bushes, smothered already in scarlet berries, stood like enchanted sentinels at the rustic wooden gates. What, however, struck me as curious was the deathly silence which ranged over all. Not a soul could I see, not a sound greeted my ears. I felt as if I had walked into some spellbound haunt, or a village buried in the dusty forgotten past of the Middle Ages. Not far from the church stood the old manor house. I walked along the avenue of splendid chestnut trees which led to it, wondering how it was I had come across no mention of this queer, out-of-the-way little place in my map. The house, built of grey stone and mantled in ivy, was evidently of very ancient date. Over the stone portico an inscription was carved, but so discolored by damp as to be impossible to decipher. The door itself, of massive oak and studded with nails, was black with age, my efforts to open it proving unavailing. I was about to retire when I saw an old dame hobbling towards me. She was attired in a warm black velvet gown, and a white frilled muslin hood covered her head. I asked permission to look over at the house. She was apparently dumb, for she vouchsafed me no answer, but silently produced from the reticule a heavy iron key, with which she began to fumble at the lock. It creaked ominously, opening with a harsh, grating sound to admit me. The old lady did not accompany me, but left me to make my own investigations alone. The floors were thick with dust, and the furniture, which mainly consisted of oak, was worm-eaten, whilst some fine specimens of tapestry hanging limply on the walls were fretted by a relentless colony of moths. In the long oak-paneled dining hall, several family portraits were fitted into the wainscoting. One of those struck me forcibly. It was a picture of a thin-faced, dark-eyed man wearing a ruff, but the expression was so lifelike and peculiar that it repelled and fascinated me at the same time. Opposite hung the portrait of a girl, but the gloom surrounding the face was so deep that I could make out very little of the features. A handsome silver sconce, the candles burnt almost to the sockets, and an iron inkhorn were standing on the table. I passed through many rooms, but a sense of oppression weighed me down, and an indefinable, musty odor clung to everything. My footsteps resounded mournfully through the deserted corridors, and I glanced back more than once when I fancied I could detect the sound of hushed voices whispering behind me.
Not good.
At last I entered a queer little chamber, more cheerful than the rest. On the deep window seat lay an old manuscript of music and a mandolin, the chords of which were broken. I looked out of the lattice and saw that what must have been my lady's pleasance. Now it was overgrown with weeds and brambles. Just in the middle of the lawn stood a curiously shaped sundial. The heavy perfume of a magnolia tree in bloom, which climbed the wall outside, filled the chamber, while a breath of air came sighing in and stirred the tarnished hangings of the four-poster. At the moment I happened to glance once more at the sundial and caught my breath suddenly. The transparent form of a girl was standing before it, gazing with bent head at the desolation around her. But the vision of illusion quickly faded, and I was left contemplating only the dark shadows of the trees cast and the last flickering rays of the sun on the neglected garden. After some little difficulty, I managed to find my way out of the rambling old house, and on looking back I saw the heavy door slowly pushed from inside and closed with a clang, while the key grated in the lock and turned with a hollow groan. All sorts of odd fancies crowded through my brain as I walked in the direction of the church, which I was destined to see. The lovers, joys, sorrows, and tragedies of bygone days arranged themselves in fantastic groups in my imagination as I passed upon the weed-grown pathway. The church door was open, but it was so dark inside that at first I could make nothing out. But as my eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, I noticed that the air of the mystery which enveloped both the mansion and the village was not wanting here. The pews, black with age, were all very high and narrow. The large one at the chancel end of the church was even higher than the rest and square in shape. It also boasted pillars richly carved at each corner, and all round hung velvet curtains spangled with silver cobwebs. Over the altar was a kind of alcove, ornamented with a fresco of cherubim adorning the Holy Grail. Suspended from the groined roof were some tattered flags, whilst long-robed and mail-clad effigies seemed from their shadowed recesses to fix me solemnly with stony, sightless eyes. Feeling an unaccountable weariness creeping over me, I seated myself in the great square pew, leaving the door open. Looking up, I noticed the wax tapers of the altar were burning, threw a dim light over the scene. Then my heart stood still, for gliding slowly up the aisle came a strange procession. First, the figure of a girl covered with a long white veil, and by her side a tall, fair man. Then followed a silent, gorgeous crowd. The bride and bridegroom approached the altars and knelt there. 3 monks stood awaiting them, and one, a man with eyes with fierce, gleaming jewels, stretched forth a trembling, bony hand above their hands as if in benediction. Spellbound, I waited, but the vision faded, passing away noiselessly as it had come into the gathering night. As I continued to gaze in the direction of the altar, my eyes fell upon a coffin. It was draped with a purple pall, while a young, fair-haired man knelt, keeping lonely watch beside it. Then a monk appeared. I saw his face plainly. It was that of the man whose portrait I had seen in the old dining hall. He stole stealthily up to the kneeling figure. My sight was next dazed upon an upward gleam of steel, something sinking in a dark, huddled heap on the floor, something darker still trickling down the steps, and nothing more. It must have been a dream conjured up in the It must have been a dream conjured up of the hidden past. That night, when rather late, I reached the Cheddar. I tried in vain to gain some information regarding the curious little hamlet through which I had passed. Neither my own touring map nor any of the scattered about on the parlor table could afford me the desired information. Maybe old Sarah can tell you something, suggested mine host. So next morning, being directed as to her whereabouts to old Sarah, I could accordingly went. She was sitting in the door of her tiny hut, superintending a buxom young lass in her efforts at gardening. She was chatting volubly and held a long rake with her horny hand, with which she was apparently in the habit of enforcing her remarks at intervals on the rosy-cheeked maiden, thus obviating the trouble of following her about her small domain. She was evidently not disposed to be communicative to me. The only answer she vouchsafed to my earnest inquiries was, "Say ye have the missed village, have ye?" Aye, be thankful ye came out of the sound of limb. Nigh seek te enter it again. 'Tis dead, I tell ye. Sure, 'twas a gruesome tale. Now, Nancy, shut thy mouth, child, and tend the lavender yonder. And Nancy only managed to elude the pointed exhortation of the rake by a nimble spring over the watering can. I have often since pondered over my strange experience that day on the Mendip Hills. Was it but a wraith after all, or a mist village, or as old Sarah had called it? I cannot tell, but next year I searched for it again for the village, which seemed so suddenly and utterly to have vanished from human ken. Wow.
Okay, so
it's like a ghost town
that isn't even there.
Yeah,
that's the cool part.
That's quite beautiful.
But first of all, if I'm putting myself in as the main character, I'm not going in that house.
I would totally go in the house.
No.
It's so much fun.
Hell no.
Why not?
Because it's creepy and old and abandoned and obviously completely neglected. Like, it's like, hello, come in, get murdered. No way.
Well, he survived, right? It has Edgar Allan Poe feel to that tale.
Yeah, it did.
It's dark.
The other thing, though, the church, once I watched a ghost wedding that disappeared in front of my face, yeah, I'm out.
Oh, I would enjoy that. I'd be like, show me more.
No way. More. I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm out. There's ghosts. See ya.
Let's go find one of these churches and bring our meters and stuff and see what happens.
And there is the difference between our personalities.
Yeah, I'm adventurous and you're just a scaredy cat.
Complete chicken. Absolutely.
But that's fair.
But I want to hear the story afterwards. I want to hear the story afterwards.
Of course, right? Yeah. You go experience it. Get back.
Come back and tell me the story, and I'll find out
later.
I'll find out what it was about exactly.
And I, it's fair. I'm just. You only live once, though, right?
Apparently not.
Well, he did survive, so it sounds like I guess people die, but I would have expected in the story if people did die in this place that he would have also witnessed them, kind of like 1408.
Oh, that movie.
The movie 1408.
Yeah.
So if you guys have seen 1408, he relives multiple people's deaths. So I won't say anymore because I don't want spoilers. Good movie, yeah. But when it was explained to him you lived, that was kind of what I saw.
Yeah. It was a good movie. Great story. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right. So we will be right back with another one right after this. Our next story is
welcome
called
back.
The Haunted Tree by Anonymous, one of my favorite authors, apparently.
They're always fun.
The reason they would do that is a lot of times they were written by women who were selling them to the magazines, and that would have been a huge scandal. If you'd had a wife who was selling things to magazines, well,
that's fair.
She may as well have been a whore, basically, is how that went down back then. So they would give fake names, or they would publish under a man's name, or they would just use their initials.
Anonymous.
Easier to do anonymous. That kept it nice and safe. About 50 years since, upon one of the plains which overspread large portions of the southwestern part of Maine, certain mysterious things obtruded themselves upon the notice of the community. They startled the thoughtless, puzzled, the philosophic, set the superstitious all agog, and made the timid tremble. Unaccountable sounds were heard there. Unnatural signs were seen, and often without any visible cause, dogs, cattle, and horses were terribly affrighted. A pine tree, which stood by the roadside and which overshadowed the way with its spreading branches, marked that spot which was noted for its wonders. It was tall, straight, and well-proportioned, as fair to look upon as its neighbors, and still under its deep shadows all these unaccountable phantoms appeared. The surrounding forest was thickly studded with the same stately growth. In the light of day, it was harmless. When the sun pressed its bright rays through the dark forest, when all natural objects were unmistakably distinct and visible, no fearful sight nor sound alarmed the passing man or beast. But when the eve of day was closed, when deep night, doubly thick and heavy under those green, overshadowing treetops, wrapped all things in the sable curtains, then these disturbing forces infested the place and let loose these marvels. It must be affirmed, however, that this tree did not stand in the most frightful spot traced by that lonesome highway. It was not in the middle of that gloomy forest. It stood nearer to the side, which bordered on the thickest settlement. Not far above it lay a dark, deep, chilly hollow, often entered with a shudder, which all would declare was the fit home of ghosts and hobgoblins, and where practical robbers would naturally select their ambush. Still, it soon became notorious that this apparently innocent and promising tree was a haunted tree, marked as such by all the surrounding inhabitants, heralded as such through all that region. It must be added that this spot, which rose into such puzzling notoriety, was about 2 miles from a dull, unpretentious hamlet, where stores were kept, in which some useful merchandise could be found, but the great article of trade at that time, as it was everywhere, was ardent spirits. Many then regarded strong drink as the elixir of life. What? Who are these monsters? Many then regarded strong drink as the elixir of life, while it was surely gliding them into graver difficulties than frights and heart beatings at the haunted tree. But business at the shops, at the post office, and most of all at the stores licensed to keep and sell the fashionable, much-loved beverage, would draw the rustics thither after the toils of the day were ended, many of whom had to pass the haunted tree. As a child could pass its harmless, when the light of day guarded the place, they would start in season to pass it before the dusky and fearful hour of the night licensed the appearance of these terrors. But if they went on foot, they would always have their dogs accompany them, and then not return alone if they could find company. But after taking a social glass, doing their business, listening to the gossip of the day, hearing the last reported scare at the tree, they would linger to discuss these mysterious appearances, pro and con, and avow their belief or disbelief in them. Some, who were constant attendants upon the preaching of the uneducated, unpolished, but deeply pious minister of the place, would take a still more serious view of these things. They would say, "These mysterious sights and sounds mean something. They are augur of crime, secret, dark, and heaven-daring. God is making inquisition for blood. Murder will out. Until the awful secret is divulged, that spot will be haunted." This would disturb the serenity of the man behind the counter. He prided himself as above belief in ghosts, witches, and phantoms, and is too intelligent to swallow down such admissions of spiritual manifestations or of supernatural appearances, and he would say, "Nonsense, nonsense. It's all imagination, all whims, all superstition." But at length, his own turn came to try these troubles, and to see if it was all bosh and gammon. Returning home one evening upon that road, as he approached the haunted tree, his horse stopped short and stubbornly refused to pass it. It would no more go forward than the beast upon which Balaam rode, when the angel of the Lord, with a drawn sword in his hand, confronted him. This perplexed and disconcerted our merchant, but it was no place to be angry. Though he neither saw nor heard anything unusual himself, his noble horse was trembling with fear and unwilling to advance, as if the road was bristling with armed hobgoblins. He whipped and goaded him on until, with a desperate plunge, he dashed out into the thick, scraggy bushes, rushed by the obnoxious tree, and ran at the top of his speed until he brought up, panting and trembling, at his own stable door. Another incident, which is hard to put aside as mere phantasm. An elderly man of a bold, defiant spirit was passing that way in a partially intoxicated state. A son of 6 or 8 years and his faithful dog were with him. As they drew near the tree, a light was seen, as if some invisible hand were holding a lantern. The old man cheered his dog on to an attack. Bristling and barking, he bravely struck for the light when it moved out into the forest. Our tippling friend, more daring than usual just then, attempted to follow it. Up to that point, the courage of the boy held out, as he informed the writer, as he saw nothing but a light, and that retreating before the dog. But when the father turned into the bushes, he was thoroughly affrighted, and wished to hasten home, if not forbade it. But the light soon faded. The dog became composed, and the father returned to the road, and another wonder was reported. Sometimes these same persons would pass unmolested, silence reigning through the whole forest, and no unearthly sight disturbed them. Some passed frequently in night's deepest darkness, and never saw or heard anything strange or supernatural. Such was the case with a young physician, whose practice often led him by that place. He was a man of integrity, every way reliable, generous, and kind in spirit, keeping a clear conscience towards all men. He was fearless of both the dead and the living, and often in the still hours of night rode by the tree, calling upon anyone who had anything to make known to come and tell it. But he had no visions of these things. Those who were molested by these unaccountable manifestations were usually struck dumb, passed it as best they could, and gave no challenge. On a snowy winter day, 2 men of good habits, sound judgment, and unquestionable veracity were passing by that place with wagons heavily laden. The falling snow had become quite deep. They plodded slowly through it, beguiling their dreary way with occasional conversation, as one of them was observing that nobody ventured out. The storm was so severe. They both looked forward and saw an old and peculiarly dressed man footing it through the deep snow towards them. Both noticed him, saw that he was a stranger to them, but in all his appearances a veritable man. The driver of the foremost wagon went forward to get his horses a little out of the road and give the venerable stranger an easier passage by, and behold, no one was to be seen. Looking around in every direction and seeing no one, he asked his companion if he saw a man just before approaching them. He replied he did. What had become of him? He could not tell. They stopped their wagon, made search, but could not discover any track on the snow, either in the wood nor where they thought they saw him in the road, nor in any direction by which he might have turned aside. Yet they both ever affirmed that they could not have been mistaken, and that the form and dress and notions of a veritable man surely appeared to them. Thus several years passed on. The list of unnatural manifestations lengthened. The wonders of the haunted tree grew more and more wonderful till they reached the climax in a face-to-face interview. The mystery was then solved, the curtain dropped, and no more troubles had been experienced. Upon one of those fertile ridges which rise from the plain there lived a young man, truthful in speech, industrious in his habits, of strong nerve, and not especially superstitious. Upon a bright moonlit night, in the month of September, he was returning from the store at an early hour, alone but in a state of calm sobriety. Reaching the haunted tree, the horse upon which he rode came to a dead stop, and would not be urged further. Nothing unusual was there, visible to the rider. He coolly dismounted, stepped before the horse, and led him without any unwillingness to follow his rider by that fearful place. Having passed the gulf safe and fearless too, without premeditation, scarcely conscious of what he was doing, he spoke out in a firm voice. "If anyone is here who wants anything of me, I would like to see him." Immediately a man, Venerable in appearance, dressed in a gone-by style with gray locks hanging below a broad-brimmed hat, stood directly before him. Surprised, dismayed, and nearly confounded, he felt that he was sent for, and the worst might as well come on. So in trembling tones he asked, "What do you want of me?" The spectre, in tones our dismayed friend could never forget, proceeded thus. "My name is Hiram White. 25 years ago I was robbed of 30 silver dollars and then murdered under this tree.
Wow.
The names of 2 of the guilty perpetrators of that deed of blood will I give, as they are still now living. They were Caleb Walsh and Franklin Orme. But some parts of that awful scene I cannot relate to. Read the 9th Psalm, and you will apprehend them. I have long haunted this blood-stained spot to make someone inquire for the terrible secret. You are the first person that has challenged me, and now I have divulged it. These things will no more appear. Follow me, and I will show you where they buried my body." The spectre led the way into the forest, and our terrified friend followed, feeling that it was no time to oppose or make excuses. Coming to a low, overshadowed hollow, he affirmed, "Here is the place," and instantly vanished.
Wow.
The young man, finding himself unharmed physically and still alive, though the last dread summons could not have caused a greater mental anguish, made his way back to his horse, which, totally undisturbed, had not started from the place where he left him. He rode slowly home, deeply affected by what he had seen and heard, and upon reaching home, his sad and woeful countenance betrayed him. "What is the matter?" was the first inquiry of his wife. He tried to evade a disclosure, but could not. Unbosoming himself freely, confidentially to her, it was too momentous, too sacred to be kept a secret. Once let loose, it traveled with lightning speed and power through the community. The place pointed out as that where the corpse had been buried was dug open, and there, sure enough, human bones were found. But did any other circumstances corroborate the young man's statement? The recollections of the aged were sounded, and some of them remembered that a man bearing the name of him who professed to be the victim occasionally visited that place as an itinerant preacher, about that time referred to in that disclosure, but his visits had suddenly ceased, and he was not heard from afterwards. But as he came from a distant place in New Hampshire, oh, so far away, from Maine, and was somewhat eccentric, his non-appearance excited no surprise. His profession as a preacher may explain the peculiarity of his sending his auditor to an imprecatory psalm to find the supplement of his awful disclosure. Another fact is well verified. About the same date of this alleged crime, a stray horse, with his saddle turned and bridle on, was found in the highway, about 2 miles from this noted tree. It was advertised. A green and white horse was kept upon his neck for several months, as the law required, but no owner ever claimed it, and it remained with the person who'd picked it up. The names given as the perpetrators of this revolting deed were not unknown, were not fictitious. They had lived and left families there, and these were sensitive and disturbed by these grave charges. They had died, too, and it was now remembered that the last trying scene with them was marked with long and intensified agonies. Beyond all precedent, they rolled and struggled in the grasp of the grim monster, but seemed forbid to die till conscience was relieved by some deathbed confession. With one of them it did come, but came to be locked up in the bosom of its recipient. After long and severe throes and awful moaning, he requested all present to leave the room save one aged, intimate neighbor. With a charge of perfect secrecy, he entrusted to him the agonizing burden which no other ear must hear. This done, death completed its work. The waiting and anxious friends came in, but could learn only what they could read upon the troubled visage of him who possessed the dying secret of the departed. Evidently an awful disclosure had been made, but none could draw it from its appointed hiding place. Such were the firm impressions left upon the minds of the staid, honest-hearted, and more intelligent of that people, no one could convince them that these things were mystical or empty phantoms. They retained the recollection of these mysterious adventures without attempting any other explanation than that which we have given.
Wow.
There you go. What do you think?
He was able to avenge his death.
He was. And I kind of like that it was in America, that one.
Yeah, Maine.
Yeah, in Maine, because they're all kind of, British. When he said the guy had died 25 years earlier, and I'm like, wait, these stories are from 1820. So was he a pilgrim?
I have no idea.
I don't know. But yeah, the haunted tree. What made me get drawn to that one was you and I have gone driving in the forest around Port Alice.
Yeah.
And we both said, like, looking to the forest, we're like, yeah I
there's
wouldn't
parts,
go in there.
Yeah, there's parts there that are...
It's dark and scary in there.
Kind of like the forest that's around Royal Roads.
Yeah, there's something wrong with that forest.
Yeah,
100%.
the energy doesn't seem right.
No,
but
no, not at all.
Yeah, that was interesting. It was cool that he came back and just showed where he laid.
Yeah. Well, and
gave their names.
The town had been having this problem with the haunted tree for 25 years, and no one ever stopped and went, "Hey,
haunted tree.
Can I do anything for you?" Like,
no.
That was a great story.
It was really well read.
All right, we are going to disappear, and when we come back, we're going to do our closing and talk about our Christmas present giveaway.
Yeah, the Christmas present.
Right after this. All right, and we're back.
Yeah, that was great. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
I hope you enjoyed the stories.
Maybe it might have put some of you to sleep. Who knows? Just don't do.
You can't get a better. You can't get a better sleepy time than someone reading a story. So
especially when you're dressed like this.
I'm pretty much just going to finish this and roll into bed. So that's
that's
the
cool?
plan.
That's
Although
handy.
maybe not with this. This feels
this is itchy.
Yeah,
I've had the itchy.
Feels a little unnatural. I'm not gonna lie.
It is a little weird.
It is a little weird.
Especially it pulls off to one side too.
Well, this whole thing is a little weird. Really,
well, it is what it is. We're giving great stories. And I certainly hope everyone really liked it.
Yeah, I hope. I do. I really hope everyone has.
All 5 of our viewers.
Yeah, all tens of you. What I wanted to do before we do our Patreon thanks and sign off is one of the things I've been doing kind of on the side is Audible books for other authors.
Yeah, Audibles.
Yeah, and Barbara Smith has put out 2 books on Kindle, solely on Kindle. And one of them, and I've done both of them as Audible, but one of them, I've got some giveaway books for it. So what I thought I would do is we are going to stop messing with the lantern.
Sorry.
What we're going to do is...
it smells.
A lot smells. We're going to... The book is called Deadly Paranormal. And it's Barbara writes the first half of the chapter, and then she has this friend who's a psychic who chimes in on the second half of the chapter, and she takes on some famous cases like Jack the Ripper and the Titanic and all this other stuff. It's really interesting. And she was very kind enough to let me do the Audible book for her. So as a result, I am promoting it as well.
Fabulous.
So what we're going to do is the first 5 emails we get
with your
from our lovely people who volunteered to tell their story, or stories from where you live.
Yeah,
I need to be clear about that. When
we're happy to have your stories.
We want to do a place. We had our friend in Las Vegas give us his stories. Our friend in Boulder, Colorado, give us his stories. We're looking not just for your personal stories. We want the stories about your place. That's what we're looking for. So if you're willing to bring us your city and you agree to come on the show and chat with us over...
we should have a telethon.
Zoom or whatever. Shut up. Over Zoom or
just
whatever.
All these phones around here. Telethon your stories to us.
No. If you're willing to step up and be willing to do that, we would love to send you a download code for a free copy of the Audible version of Deadly Paranormal off of Audible. And also, once you've done the show, you'll be getting sent what?
Oh.
Do you remember?
The pins.
There you go.
100%.
The pins that only people who have been on the show get.
Yeah, the pins.
And they even glow in the dark.
They glow in the dark. They're very cute.
They are super cool. But they don't look weirdly yellow like those old glow in the dark things. So yeah, you have to mail it in though. Don't send me a DM. Don't send me a Facebook message. I keep losing those.
Mail it in.
Email ghostsandbears@gmail.com. And we will get you on the show. We'll get you your pin, and most importantly, we're going to do the Christmas giveaway with the five
books,
5 Audible books of
5 days
Paranormal.
of Christmas, 5 days of Audible books.
It's not even a thing.
It's not really a thing, is it? I'm just trying to throw some nonsense out.
I am grateful.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Other than that, we want to say thank you to our lovely
thank you
patrons who help us out, our patrons. And remember, if you're looking to give yourself a gift this Christmas,
that's right.
Becoming a patron is a great way to do that, because you're going to end up with Ghost Stories We Have Heard episodes every other week, and you will even get
you'll get cups and saucers.
You didn't use your
shirts.
Saucers.
Merch.
You didn't use your favorite word.
You get merch.
You get merch.
I love merch.
So yeah,
this isn't merch though. This is.
You're not getting that. You're gonna have to. You're gonna have to claw that out of my cold dead hand. No, you're gonna coffee mug, t-shirts, and decals. I believe are the merch items du jour. You get those after 3 months of being a patron.
Merch of the day.
And you're also going to get pictures for every episode we do, behind the scenes pictures. I think we're even going to have them for this one. Are we going to have them for this one?
I think we're going to.
And once again, doing this video, helping us out has been Alex and Chris, and Josh has been here to help as well. So we want to thank you guys, because we couldn't do this. Trust me. If you guys were expecting a video thing from me,
and it was made fun of my video.
It would be me just holding my cell phone here. That would be the entire video.
Well, there are certain people that do that. They just use iPhones.
They do. So that's what we're talking about. But we want to thank everyone who is a patron.
Yes, thank you.
Please consider becoming a patron. Again, it's just patreon.com/Ghosts and Bears, and you will find us there, and there's all the different tiers that you can look at. In the meantime, we want to thank our existing patrons, and they are including Amos, Maria, Gina, Elise, Sharon, Dawn, Adam. Oh, it's not going to go down for me. Of course it's not. I'm doing it right now on a video, so of course it won't work. Bryce, Sherry, Brooks, Marion, Kathleen, Alexa, Debbie, Ruth, Mary Frances, Gina and Victoria, Sandy, Christopher, David, Ashley, Jeremiah, Elizabeth, BB Nix, Melinda, Jordan, Tammy, James, Taya, Evan, Arwin, Steve, Kyle and Charlotte, Catherine, and
Myri.
So thank you
so much.
That one I
actually knew.
You knew that one,
yeah. I can't see the screen that well from way over here.
That's why we decided I would just do it.
Yes.
Other than that, we want to thank you guys for another amazing year.
And have a wonderful Merry Christmas.
Or whatever winter holiday you were celebrating.
Winter Wonderland stuff.
And a wonderful New Year. And when are we back? January 18th?
I believe. The 18th.
We are going to take a season break. So we'll be back on the 18th of January with a fresh new episode. You'll also be able to catch the new TV show they're going to be working on with Shaw this year with these guys as well.
Yes.
So that'd be fun. We'll give you information on how to find it.
Cool camera gear.
There you go.
I think they're more excited than we are.
All right, friends. Thank you so much. Thanks for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed the stories. And remember, if you're looking for a podcast that's got everything you want, we're the only one that's got the actual ghost story.
With the actual history.
In the actual place. And hopefully someday soon, that place
will be with you.
Take care, guys. Merry Christmas.
Have a good one. Happy New Year.